we have no real media in this state. Well, you have us.
It's really time for a parent revolution.
Never let a good crisis go to waste. That's what the left did with COVID in so many different ways.
Wind energy, especially offshore wind, is a big loser and just another government boondoggle.
Like, what's going on?
People are fed up. They lied to us then. They're lying to us now. They're assaulting our families.
What we do is we look at the lies of the left that they keep pushing out, that America doesn't work for black people. That is not true.
They want to now monopolize truth and say, truth is only what we say truth is. Damn the data, damn the science.
The key with science is it always needs to serve objective thinking. They just call anyone who challenges them a science deniers.
They're evil.
Shut up or we'll cancel you.
What we're going through is a cultural revolution.
This is big, and this is how change begins.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Ocean State Current Command Bunker. Now playing from in the dugout, number 37, Mike Stenhouse.
Our Rhode Island statewide and federal officials playing unfair politics and denying Rhode Island citizens the right to election process that we view as having integrity? And are they blocking Rhode Island from having a duly required U.S. attorney to help enforce federal law? The hypocrisy, the politics, it's just overwhelming. Hey, folks, welcome to In the Dugout. Your host, Mike Stenhouse here. On the first issue, when it comes to election integrity, earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Justice under Trump, and even including a Trump executive order, kept pushing forward its campaign, as you all know, President Trump has done, to sort of bring back integrity to certain aspects of the voting process. This issue today, including a lawsuit I'll tell you about, has to do with statewide voter registration lists. And those lists include a lot of personal information, but it's information the federal government has in various places. Full names, addresses, birth dates, driver's license numbers, last four digits, Social Security, et cetera. And the federal government has asked states to turn over that information so they could see if there's basically duplicates or duplicate registrations or Social Security numbers that aren't valid and whatnot, because it is required by federal law that the federal government can set guidelines for states to have relatively clean voter registration lists. But mostly Democrat-led states, including Rhode Island and including California, Delaware, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, and Pennsylvania, also Vermont, Washington, have declined to turn over their lists. Many other states have, but they've refused to provide this data, saying that it's not within the federal government's purview, that it's an overreach, it risks privacy, and might even enable voter suppression. Of course, supporters of it claim that, hey, this is a way to enforce federal law. There are three federal laws that give the federal government some oversight, if not power, on when it comes to this issue. You have the National Voter Registration Act, we have the Help America Vote Act, and you have the Civil Rights Act of 1960, all of which seem to give the federal government some say in not how states run election, but ensuring that states have clean voter rolls. But yet states like Rhode Island are saying, no, that's our business, not yours. But in doing so, they're exposing a great hypocrisy that we're going to review with our guest, Suzanne Cienki, who's both an attorney and a former high-ranking official here in the Rhode Island Republican Party. So we're going to dig into both the politics and the legality. But Rhode Island, be clear, has been sued by the U.S. Department of Justice to turn over that information. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because clearly we have a case of federal oversight as required by law, but we also have an issue of states' rights and states' rights to run elections as they see fit. It'd be very interesting to have that discussion and see how this turns out. The second issue we're going to discuss with Suzanne Cienki has to do with our two United States senators and a very obscure process called the blue slip process, where in order for any president to make certain appointments to the judiciary, in this case, that's what we're talking about, but it also applies to certain other appointments, that the two senators in that state have to turn in a blue slip saying, okay, we're okay if you appoint this person. Well, do senators really have the right to block just two senators without going through the full advising consent process? Do just two senators from any state, in our case, do Senators Reid and Whitehouse have the right to block any appointment they don't like, any conservative? Obviously, these are two liberals. Can they just block any conservative Trump wants to appoint? I mean, Trump won the election. Doesn't he have the right to appoint the U.S. attorneys and other nominees that he wants? Or can just two senators from that state block any appointment? We're going to dig into that issue as well with our guest, who you will meet right now. So I'd like to welcome back to In the Dugout our good friend, former chair of the Rhode Island Republican Party, now the National Committee woman from Rhode Island, but she's also a very accomplished attorney. And here we're going to get both her political and her legal expertise in talking about the two issues that I just framed in my opening. So we welcome back to In the Dugout, Suzanne Cienki. Suzanne, welcome back.
Hi, Mike. Good morning. How are you?
All right. Thank you for joining us from Florida, right?
Yes, from Florida, from sunny
Nice.
Florida.
Nice. Warm down there?
Well, it was rainy
Oh.
during the weekend, but it's about 60 degrees, so way
Okay.
warmer than it is in New England.
No, yeah, we've had totally below freezing days here in Rhode Island, and this will be a second. So Rhode Island was sued by the Department of Justice, I think, for not following President Trump's executive order to turn over certain data of our voter rolls. Frame the debate for us initially, without getting into too much detail, just generally.
Yeah, well, the most important thing that a United States citizen has is their ability to vote. And I know that the Department of Justice wants to make sure that your vote is protected. That is the number one thing in a constitutional republic, to make sure that all the voter rolls are clean, and to really give people the idea that your vote counts, the voter rolls are clean, only the United States citizens have the ability to vote, and they are voting. So the DOJ has come in, they have asked all the states to comply with the Help America Vote Act and to make sure that there aren't double people voting in both states, there aren't dead people, nobody's using anybody else's social security number to vote. So the DOJ has requested the social security numbers and the driver's license numbers from your voters.
Just the last four of the Social Security, right?
Yes, just the last four. So not your whole social security, but the last four, and or your driver's license number. Your driver's license are already public. That's a public record. The social security numbers are given to you by the federal government.
Right.
So they're not asking for things that are really out of the norm. And quite frankly, all we hear from the
Before we get into the argument before we get back
Okay.
to that, I want to get into that. But at a high level, what we have here, correct me if I'm wrong, is a classic battle between states' rights and federal oversight. Now, you mentioned the Voting Rights Act, there's a Help America Vote Act, there's Civil Rights Act. There's a lot of prior laws that come into play here that seem to grant the federal government overview and somehow to ensure that states are properly maintaining voter rolls, but yet states have their rights too. So when you look at a state's rights, and we're a big states' rights organization, but when you look at it as an attorney, talk about the states' rights versus federal oversight roles in this particular instance.
Certainly, the states are in charge of running the elections. They are in charge of running it and maintaining voter lists. But the federal government certainly has an interest in it because you are running federal elections at the state level. So the Secretary of State, their role in elections is really to register people and maintain the voter lists. The Board of Elections are the ones who actually run the election. So we're not talking about how your election is run. We're talking about your voter lists and to make sure that they comply with all the federal laws that are promulgated by Congress.
And do you believe that the Department of Justice and Trump executive order request comply with those federal laws, or do you think it's a little bit of a gray area?
No, I think that they have every right to ask for it to make sure. And quite frankly, Rhode Island joined a group called ERIC. And ERIC is an organization, a non-governmental organization that states could join. And what it was cross-checking to make sure that, if somebody moved to another ERIC state, another state that joined ERIC, that they would cross-check their voter rolls to make sure that people were not registered to vote in two different jurisdictions and they weren't voting in two different jurisdictions. Now, I actually thought
that's ostensibly what ERIC is about.
Right. So initially that concept is great. If somebody moves to Connecticut, if somebody moved to Massachusetts and they registered to vote in that jurisdiction, they would then be removed from the voter lists in Rhode Island. It's not really what ERIC turned out to be. They were selling your information to third-party, non-governmental organizations. So your privacy was already gone.
All right, so let's set this up. Rhode Island Secretary of State Greg Amore is the one who refused to turn over the list. As I mentioned in my open, about a dozen or more states have refused to. About a half dozen states have already done so. Another 10 or 12 states are in the process of negotiating with the federal government to turn over their list. But Rhode Island is one of the states that's refused to, one of the states that's been sued. And he says, I would never give out such private, personally, what we call PII, personally identifiable information, but yet he gives it out to a non-governmental organization.
Right.
The hypocrisy.
His argument is quite specious. It's ridiculous. And again, your driver's license is public information. So that information is already out there. Your social security number is already out there. And maybe he forgot about what happened with I call it the Deloitte debacle, where close to 700,000 Rhode Islanders' personal information is already out there. And I am sure that
that was about a dozen years ago here in Rhode Island. Yeah.
Yeah. And it happens, consistently. People have to be very, very careful with their personal information. But here we have an instance that I am sure the DOJ will stipulate when they get that personal information that it will be used only for investigative purposes. So that means it's not going anywhere. They're just going to check the voter rolls, across the country to make sure that there's no double registered people. Now, it's interesting enough because if you remember during COVID, Nellie Gorbea sent mail ballot applications to everybody on that voter list. They said that was one way to help clean the voter rolls. But what she had failed to do was tell people what happens when you get an application for somebody that doesn't live there, somebody that died, one of your children that no longer lives in the state. It kind of went into, I don't know, a lot of people threw them out. I was recommending to people to send it back to the Secretary of State. Through that process, she was able to pull off, I think it was close to 60,000 people, but she didn't tie it up in a knot, tie it in a bow. She didn't tell people what to do with it. Now, fast forward, Greg Amore has sent out this voter registration, voter envelope, and it says if somebody no longer, you don't have to do anything. You're a non-participant.
Yeah, I got one of those letters. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a non-participant in the process, which is ridiculous. It's really, look at your voter list. If it's correct, check it off, send it back. If it's not, then send it back to the Secretary of State's office. So even, I appreciate the fact that he is trying, but even him, it was a very passive, expensive, I'm sure, operation, and it didn't really help clean the voter rolls.
But what do you think's going on here? Let me just frame it this way. So the federal government is the one who issued Social Security numbers. Like you said, driver's license is public. We give this information, Rhode Island specifically, Greg Amore specifically, gives this information to that third party, whose acronym is ERIC, E-R-I-C. But yet he's refusing to give it to the federal government. Why? Is it just TDS, anti-Trump syndrome stuff, or do you think they're trying to hide something? What do you think is going on?
I don't think they're trying to hide something. I think that the people that work in the Secretary of State's office, they try hard. And I'm like, if somebody wants to give you help, and really not all states, there have been a number of states that have actually pulled out of ERIC. So what once started as a national organization to help clean voter rolls, there's less than, I think, half the states that belong to it now. So now you've got the federal government saying, hey, we'll help you clean your voter rolls. We'll make sure that they're good. Everybody will be very confident in just the voter rolls. We want to make sure that you're following the federal law as to who can actually register, who's on there. There have been instances, not many, but there have been instances of people that have double voted, between Florida and Rhode Island. And we caught a couple of those people and they were prosecuted. The Social Security numbers, we've seen instances across the country where Social Security numbers have been stolen. This is fact. That is not anecdotal, made up stuff. So if the federal government cross-checks, we can make sure there's one Social Security number going to Jane Jones and she's voting in Maine, and it's great, and everybody has confidence then.
All right. So, you just said make sure confidence. Those are the key things. Look, we can talk about how many people double voted, how many non people who aren't supposed to voted. We can talk about all that, how many people were prosecuted or not. But what really is at stake here is voter confidence in the integrity of our elections. And when we know there are such glaring holes, when we know that voter rolls are not accurate, when we see that states are not taking every step, like you said, to wrap it up, put a nice bow on it, and make sure, we are really defeating, and especially in our state, there's a lot of unease about the integrity of our election system in this state. So isn't that really what this is all about?
Yeah. And, I know that Secretary of State Greg Amore, he says our elections are clean. We're great. We do a great job in Rhode Island. Well, if they're that confident and they go through this process and it shows that we are a model for the rest of the country, it's something we should be tooting our horns about. We should be saying, look at Rhode Island. We are the model. We do the best. This pushback, I just don't get it.
Even though you don't believe it makes people like me wonder, well, maybe they are trying to hide something.
Right. It makes anybody that tends towards being a conspiracy theorist saying, well, they're not giving it up, so they must have something to hide. Because we all know that half of the stuff they're asking for is already public record, and the other half the federal government already gives us. So what's the issue here? And help us.
All right, slightly different topic on the same issue. Is this, in essence, which I would be diametrically severely opposed to, I don't even know if I used the right word there, are we in essence creating a national voter database?
Yeah, you could say that. You could say that, making sure that across the country, the voter lists are clean. Of course, each state is still going to be in charge of maintaining their own voter lists, and it's not actually going to the federal government. Again, that is something that could be stipulated with the DOJ when you negotiate with them. You get a one-time look at our voter lists to make sure they're accurate, and then it goes back to the states to maintain.
So would you say the purpose, yes, we understand maintaining voter rolls and all that,
Right.
but at a higher level, is the purpose of this database checking, well, is it to individually say these people are not eligible to vote, or is it to just look at the process of each state and say, you, Rhode Island, are not complying with federal guidelines on how to maintain your voter database, get your act together and get rid of the people who shouldn't be there? Or is the federal government, do you think, I say, remember, that person, that person, that person, that person should not be on your voter list?
You know, it's probably a little bit of both. You know, you don't want to keep people on that shouldn't be on your voter roll, and you want to make sure that people that are eligible are on your voter roll. Actually, I think in Rhode Island, we have a really high percentage of voter registration. We have motor voter. Anybody that's got a license can register to vote there. A lot of government agencies, from Department of Health and Human Services, they register people when they come in. There are a lot of different, you can go to AAA and get your license and register to vote. So there are a lot of places where in Rhode Island that you can register to vote. I think we do a good job of registering people. We just want to make sure, you know, that people that are on there still live here and are eligible to vote. And not,
So the infringing on voter privacy argument, I think is bogus, because we're sharing that information with other people, and Rhode Island is not the safest place, as you've said, to store sensitive data anyway. They're also claiming it is a voter suppression tactic, that the federal government's gonna somehow see to it that registered Democrats aren't allowed to vote, and they therefore call it, you know, political weaponization of the voter database. Just any quick thoughts on that?
no, and again, I think any of those concerns you would bring to the DOJ and stipulate exactly how the information is being used. So all those worries can be negotiated with the Department of Justice. I think that you can protect Rhode Islanders and still comply with what the federal government wants.
You know, some of the other more specious arguments, well, you know, this is a violation of sort of the Constitution, you know, of sort of commandeering of state resources, because you're ordering the state to devote resources to produce these lists. I mean, that's kind of a weak argument as well. But again, you're pretty comfortable as an attorney that the federal government has a right to ensure that standard and legal, you know, legal precedent in law, National Voter Registration Act, Help America Vote Act, Civil Rights Act, all that they're legally protected or safe under those guidelines.
Yeah, I think they have a pretty solid footing to make sure.
So what will happen? This case, obviously, this Secretary of State's not going to give in. The lawsuits, give me a timeline and a process. These lawsuits will happen when, and then will be appealed up to what, and when will there be a determination before next year's elections?
Yeah, who knows? You know, when you enter the legal realm, things tend to move rather slowly. There's a reason for that, to give both litigants an opportunity to lay out their case. What we've seen in other states is they've negotiated with the Department of Justice, and they've already removed 100,000 non-eligible voters off of some of these lists. So it seems to work. It seems to give people more confidence that their voter lists are clean. And again, if Rhode Island thinks we're so fabulous, let's go through the exercise, stipulate what you're afraid of, and let's move on. Because when you talk about wasting money, it seems as if our state attorney general, Peter Nerona, spends an awful lot of time suing the Trump administration and over just about everything. And it's talk about lawfare. It's a waste of resources, and I just don't understand the end game. there's a purpose for when you file a lawsuit, and I think he's just abusing it.
Yeah, well, there is cases being heard now that probably once and for all, not just for this president, Trump, but for future presidents, it seems like the Supreme Court's going to pretty much, and as they have been doing, affirm that the president really is granted great powers in the Constitution, and that they'll probably reaffirm that those powers need to be honored. One last thing on this before we go on to the blue slip issue. And just to build on what you said earlier, the states that already have provided those voter lists, they've already uncovered a lot of irregularities, outdated registrations, people listed in multiple jurisdictions, a number of other things. So the proof kind of is in the pudding that if you really do the right kind of analysis of your voter rolls, you can clean them up quite a bit.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it works, it's effective. And again, it is the exact system that they joined in Rhode Island with ERIC, a non-governmental organization to help clean the voter rolls. Again, great idea. But now they're fighting the federal government that wants to really basically do the same thing. So
I mean, talk about weaponizing this. ERIC has weaponized this in a very partisan way, as we've talked about with Sarah Vieira and others, Ned Jones and others on this show in past years. All right, I want to move on to the blue slip issue. Let's start this way. When is Rhode Island going to get a U.S. attorney?
Yeah, and that's, a lot of people don't understand what happens. When a president takes office, there are certain federal jobs that federal appointees that the president gets to choose, pick, and forward nominations for advice and consent in the Senate. One of the jobs specifically that impacts Rhode Island is a U.S. attorney's role. When President Trump was elected, there were several attorneys that were interested in that role. I forwarded a lot of their resumes.
Hold on right there. I just want to set the background, which I didn't get to explain in the open. But as Rhode Island's national committee woman, and I assume Tom Carroll as national committee man, it is sort of your job to sort of advise the administration, in your case, in the same party, the Trump administration, of, hey, here are some good people you may want to consider for this U.S. attorney role or for anything else, certain other federal jobs as well. But this is your job, right, to try to match make and to make recommendations and advise, right?
Right. We're on the ground here. We live in Rhode Island. So they ask us, for recommendations, or if there is someone that is recommended outside of our role that would go around us, they would ask us, do you know this person? What's their reputation? Are they a competent attorney? Can they get the job done? What's their background? So we kind of help weed through the process. And as I said, there were a number of very competent attorneys that said, hey, I'd be interested in that role. So we forward them to the White House counsel, over to DOJ, and it's their job to interview people, to skinny down the list and make a determination of who they'd like to be U.S. attorney. Now, the blue slip, which operates...
Let me jump in right there. I just want to put a little self-aggrandizement here, but even I made a recommendation to you to recommend to them about somebody. We won't mention any names, and I think you confirm that person is being seriously considered. But anyway, I just wanted to toot my own horn there a little bit. So, but that's good for you. You came out and you talked to people about all this, got any ideas, and so you listen. You send them up the line. All right, talk about the blue slip process.
So the blue slip process is where the sitting United States senators that represent that state, they can say, we don't like that person, or we don't want that person, and they really can hold up the process. Now, it works for red states. I know they call it the blue slip, but it does work in red states. It does work in blue states. And it really halts the process. Like they won't agree to a nominee for one reason or the other. And it's happened here. Senator Reid,
let's just talk about it bluntly.
Okay.
Democrats don't want a conservative U.S. attorney, period, right?
Yeah,
and they
and it
won't.
goes.
And
it
in
goes-
our case, Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse will not hand in their blue slip for anybody who they think is too conservative. And the Senate is honoring that. The Senate Judiciary Chair Grassley is honoring that tradition, right?
Yes,
It's
a
not a
tradition.
law. It's not a constitutional requirement.
Yeah, and now it goes I guess a step further than that, because
Okay.
what ends up happening in a lot of these states is the Trump administration will hire someone as an interim U.S. attorney. Now, when they do that, they can only serve for 120 days. After 120 days, if they're not formally nominated for that position, or their nomination is stalled, what happens is the federal district court judges then get to pick who the U.S. attorney is.
Well, say that again. Say that again.
So after the 120 days, if the nomination has not moved forward, and that person has not been confirmed by the Senate, the federal district court judge in that jurisdiction gets to appoint a U.S. attorney. I think that is a lawsuit waiting to happen, because I believe that the judiciary does not have the role of appointing an Article II appointment, which is the president's job. It's the president has the job of nominating, the Senate with advice and consent.
All right, so where is that rule? Is that written in law? Is that a Senate rule? Is that a constitutional rule? Is that a congressional legislation? Where does that come from?
So that is what is going on, is what I said. That is what is happening, and I think that is something that eventually I would hope that someone starts paying attention to it. It happened in Virginia. It's happening in New Jersey, where the district court judge then gets to decide. And of course, up in Rhode Island, the district court judges were left leaning. They're
Right.
not going to approve the president's nominee.
Trump. Let's take Alina Habba, who just said, "Okay, I will step down." Alina Habba was appointed on the 120-day interim basis.
Right.
If I got it right, he then said, "Well, I'm going to reappoint you for another temporary 120 days." And so the court, the federal court, a lower court, and then a federal court said, "No, after 120 days, what you talked about has to go into effect." So did I get that part right?
Yeah, you got that
Okay.
part right. So
In Rhode Island, have they even appointed a temporary U.S. attorney yet?
No.
Why not? Why
not? They have an acting U.S. attorney. When Zachary Cunha resigned from being U.S. attorney because he was a Biden appointment, he left, and then his number two in the office, Sarah Bloom, became the acting U.S. attorney. But an acting U.S. attorney under those circumstances, there's a time limit for that too. It's a little over 200 days. She's coming to the end of that. So something has to happen soon. I imagine we're going to get a 120-day appointment. And this is what President Trump is jumping up and down about, the blue slip. Get rid of it. When a president wins the presidency, he should have the ability to appoint the people that he wants.
Without mentioning names, can you confirm, because you're in the middle of these discussions, you know what's going on, can you at least confirm that Trump has floated some names and that either Reid or Whitehouse has nixed it, said, "No, you'll never get my approval on that"? Can you confirm that has happened?
So what I will tell you is that the Trump White House, the DOJ, the White House counsel, they have interviewed a number of people. They have interviewed people. And then Senator Reid and Whitehouse then put out a press release that they're working with the White House and they're going to screen people. So
That's not their job.
Well, then a number of people had called me that were interested, and I said, go through the process. Get interviewed. Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse's team then said that they would be submitting their approved list to the White House. So I think that's where we are in the process now. Whether
just like you say, it's not the judiciary's role to to appoint or nominate a judge. It's also not the senator's role to designate an appointee.
But that's exactly what's happening. And it is, it was bad during Trump's first administration, but this time, they were holding up ambassador appointments. They were holding up department appointments. And of course here,
all of that stuff.
Excuse me?
They can blue flip all of that, ambassadors and all that.
They were holding up everything.
All right. Who was the U.S. attorney under Trump's first term?
Aaron Weisberg. And he was great. And I had no complaints
White House,
about.
we're okay with that.
Yeah, they were okay with that. He was fine. Zach Cuna, I didn't have a problem with him either. Our role, we are not going to recommend someone that we don't think is going to do a good job, someone that is going to take the role as U.S. attorney. And I can't think of any attorney that has asked to step into that role that is not going to take that role seriously. I mean, there's a lot of things that they do in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and not to have a lead U.S. attorney is outrageous. I mean, no attorney is going to put their career on the line to do something that would be offensive to Senator Reid and White House and to the citizens of Rhode Island. I just think you have. I can tell you the people that have personally contacted me are all excellent, excellent attorneys.
All right. So to me, and I assume to you, what would make a good U.S. attorney is somebody who in a nonpartisan way strictly upholds the law and upholds the Constitution of the United States of America.
Yes.
It seems to me, and you probably wouldn't say it because you're more diplomatic than me, but it seems to me that White House and Reid, like we've seen with so many other judges in so many other jurisdictions, want judges who follow the woke progressive model of ignoring the Constitution and the rule of law.
Right. You don't want
in any way. Might I be close to being accurate there?
Yeah. You don't want any judicial activists, and you certainly want people that are going to follow the law.
Well, but what do Reid and White House want judicial activists?
Well, I just think that they want to stop anybody from being appointed, and I think that's not their role. I mean,
all right.
We know how the system works. When to the victor goes the spoils. President Trump won the election, so therefore he gets to appoint people. And he really has asked people on the ground, are these competent attorneys? Do they have a good reputation? Can they get the job done? And quite frankly, everybody in Rhode Island.
But what once worked in the Senate with these courtesy rules like the filibuster, that's not in the Constitution, it's not required by law, by Congress, like this blue slip process. When we had more collegiality in the Senate and people weren't at each other's necks and the partisanship level wasn't where it is today and the Trump derangement syndrome wasn't around, you could work with filibusters and you could work with blue slip process. But do you think the president is right that both of those are antiquated practices, because they're not required by law? Do you think Trump is right in urging Senator Grassley, head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, to say, like the filibuster, this blue slip practice needs to go? Just like you said, to the victor goes the spoils. I need to be able to appoint the people I want to appoint because I won the election. Do you think blue slip process has run its course?
Yeah, I'm conflicted about the filibuster. I think it does serve a certain purpose, specifically at any point you become the minority party. So it works both ways. The blue slip process, I can tell you, I know Republican senators that don't want to get rid of it because they utilize it. I just don't like the blue slip process because I just think you're right. The president gets to pick who his department chairs are, who his, U.S. attorneys are throughout the country. And the Senate has advice and consent. There's a process for that. So if he should nominate somebody that was so far out of the realm, that would be revealed during the nomination process. I mean, anybody that has watched those hearings, the nominees get asked a lot of very good questions, the senators do their job in what their role is. But to completely stop it before you even get there, you're not even allowing these people a day in a hearing. And that happened during Trump's first administration with several of the ambassador positions. They never even got a hearing. They never even were brought up to be questioned.
So the Senate says, the Constitution says the Senate has the role to advise and consent on a number of nominees for various, including the judiciary. But the blue slip process means that certain senators can stop that whole advise and consent process from, like you said, even getting off the ground.
Right.
Final question. If the blue slip, if Grassley, well, I guess I'm asking, is this an issue for the courts, or is it just something that the Senate can do on its own? Because it's just an internal tradition. Do the courts, if Grassley, for instance, were to stop the process of blue slips, okay, no more blue slip process, I'm gonna do away with that tradition, or if it continues, would either side have a right to take it to the courts to say, no, I want it to either stay or remain? Because it doesn't seem to be a constitutional or legal issue.
It's a Senate rule.
Is it even a rule?
Or a tradition?
Yeah.
So,
so no role for the courts.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens. It just stops. Again, it stops the process. And I think the citizens of Rhode Island deserve to have a U.S. attorney here. Our office here is not big, but I am sure that those assistant U.S. attorneys are working really hard, and they're overworked, and they'd like at least leadership. Where are we going? What are we focusing on? And where do we go from here?
So I lied. One more question. So even on the temporary assignment, the 120-day assignment, 120 days, is that what it is?
It's 120 days.
You think of probably a private practice attorney, like I assume most of them would be. They get asked to be temporary U.S. attorney. They know it's going to be over in 120 days. That probably could hurt their private practice, right? They'd lose momentum. So it really puts people kind of in a tough bond, doesn't it?
Yeah, it narrows the field. You're right.
Right.
I know there was an instance in New Jersey where Trump nominated somebody, and then they were told it's probably going to be a 120-day appointment. Well, you're a partner in a law firm.
Right.
You may be a sitting state senator. You may have a political role. You would have to give all of those up to take that 120-day appointment. So you would give up a lot to take a role that, in effect, is temporary. And that may be what happens here. So do you get the best candidate, or do you get a candidate who maybe works with their law firm and says, hey, I'm going to do this for 120 days. I'm going to leave my clients, but I'll be back. Or you get somebody that maybe at the edge of retirement and can do that. So it really narrows the field significantly.
And back to the full-time, I lied, double lied, so I'm asking two more extra questions. And this, I promise, will be the last one, because I meant to bring it up earlier. Isn't the blue slip something that kind of becomes a horse trading thing? Okay, all right, Sheldon Whitehouse, all right, Jack Reed, look, let my nominee go through, or I'll give you your nominee if you vote this way or decide not to vote against me that way. Does it become a horse trading chip?
Yeah, it can. It can be a negotiating tool that they want something, that the senators want something here. So they'd be willing to acquiesce to an appointment of President Trump's choosing. And that aggravates me because—
Well, that's corruption. That's corruption.
I always say in government it's compromise, and things move slowly for compromise, but it never seems to work out for Rhode Islanders. It seems as if you horse trade, and the citizens of Rhode Island really aren't getting anything of value for it. So it's not a good system here.
All right, Suzanne Cienki, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time this morning to give your legal and political and personal advice on all this. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
All right,
care.
and thank you to our viewers for tuning in. And until next game, Mike Stenos out. See you then.